On the morning of the 17th of October 2011, a woman known to her few neighbors in the Alfama district of Lisbon as Anya Sharma began her day with a routine that was itself a meticulously constructed artifice. She was an academic, a reclusive specialist in the conservation of antique scientific instruments, and her small, meticulously ordered workshop overlooking the Tagus River reflected this identity with flawless precision. To any observer, she was a quiet scholar, her life a cloistered existence, dedicated to the patient restoration of brass and silver artifacts from a bygone era. In reality, she was the culmination of a 4-year, $90 million intelligence operation, a human key forged by the Israeli Mossad to fit a lock no one else could pick. Her true name was Elara Golan, and she had ceased to exist in any official capacity 37 months prior. Her identity methodically erased and replaced with the legend of Anya Sharma, a persona so deeply embedded that at times, she herself struggled to find the seams between the woman she was and the woman she had become. The target of this elaborate deception was Zaid al-Qasimi, a man known to international intelligence agencies only as the Treasurer, a phantom who moved billions of dollars through a decentralized, cryptographically secured network to fund terrorist operations across the globe. A man so paranoid and technologically insulated that he had remained impervious to every attempt at surveillance, infiltration, or electronic penetration. The entire operation, codenamed Celestial Sphere, hinged on a single profound psychological insight: that even the most disciplined and cautious man possesses a vanity, a passion that can be exploited. And for al-Qasimi, that passion was the sublime, mathematical beauty of medieval Islamic astrolabes. The problem of Zaid al-Qasimi had become an existential one for Western intelligence services by the late 2000s. He was not a frontline commander or a charismatic ideologue, but something far more dangerous, a logistical and financial genius of the highest order. Al-Qasimi had revolutionized terror financing, moving it away from trackable state sponsors and vulnerable banking systems into a labyrinth of shell corporations, cryptocurrency exchanges, and informal hawala networks that were interwoven with such complexity that they were functionally invisible to traditional financial intelligence. His operational security was flawless. He communicated through custom-built, ephemeral messaging platforms that used one-time pads derived from atmospheric noise, changed his physical location unpredictably, and employed a small, fiercely loyal cadre of couriers who operated on a strictly need-to-know basis. Previous attempts to neutralize him had ended in catastrophic failure. A 2008 attempt by French intelligence to insert a technical surveillance team into his suspected base of operations in Istanbul resulted in the capture and execution of all 3 agents. A 2009 joint American-British effort to penetrate his digital network via a sophisticated malware attack was not only detected but turned against its creators. Al-Qasimi's technicians reverse-engineered the code and used it to feed disinformation back to the NSA for 6 months, a humiliating and strategically costly setback. The stakes were escalating with each passing year, as the attacks he funded grew in sophistication and lethality, from bombings in Madrid to coordinated assaults in Mumbai, all bearing the financial fingerprints of his invisible empire. The intelligence consensus was stark. Al-Qasimi could not be found, followed, or hacked. He had to be drawn out, and the bait had to be something so irresistible that it would override his legendary paranoia. The profile of Zaid al-Qasimi, assembled from fragmented intelligence and psychological analysis, painted a portrait of a man of profound contradictions. Born in Damascus to a family of academics, he had excelled in economics and mathematics at Cambridge before disappearing from public life in the late 1990s, only to resurface years later as the shadowy financier for a new generation of global jihad. He was described by the few who had ever met him as ascetic, disciplined, and utterly devoid of personal extravagance, a man who viewed the world as a complex system of equations to be solved in favor of his ideological goals. Yet, deep background intelligence work, sifting through auction house records and academic archives from his university days, uncovered a single, defining passion: his obsession with the history of science, specifically the astrolabes and astronomical instruments of the Islamic Golden Age. He was not merely a collector, he was a true connoisseur, a scholar who understood the intricate mathematics and celestial mechanics behind these objects. This was not a hobby. It was the central aesthetic and intellectual pillar of his life, the one arena where his appreciation for order, precision, and history converged. Analysts at Mossad's Caesarea department theorized that this passion was his only vulnerability, an intellectual vanity that connected him to the physical world of artifacts and experts, in a way his digital, clandestine life otherwise forbade. It was a slender thread, but it was the only one they had. The challenge was not just to exploit this interest, but to do so in a way that would bypass the concentric rings of security and suspicion he had built around himself over 2 decades. The proposal that emerged from a series of high-level strategy sessions in Tel Aviv was audacious to the point of seeming fantastical. It was codenamed Operation Celestial Sphere. The plan rejected all conventional methods of espionage, and instead proposed the creation of a bespoke human asset, an individual who would not merely impersonate an expert in al-Qasimi's field of interest, but would, for all intents and purposes, become the world's leading authority on the subject. This operative would need to be so convincing, their knowledge so profound, and their manufactured history so unimpeachable that they could attract al-Qasimi's attention organically, as a peer rather than as a target of infiltration. The primary obstacle was authenticity. The world of elite antiquities is a small, insular community where reputations are built over decades of scholarship and publication. A new, unknown expert would be met with immediate suspicion. Furthermore, the technical challenge was immense. The goal was not simply to meet al-Qasimi, but to get close enough to his personal, air-gapped hardware to deploy a physical device capable of exfiltrating the core data of his financial network encryption keys, ledgers, and communication protocols. This required a delivery mechanism that was both invisible and contextually appropriate. The risks were astronomical. If the operative's cover was compromised, it would not only lead to their certain death, but would also alert al-Qasimi that he was being targeted through his passion, forever closing that avenue of approach. The operation would require an unprecedented investment in time, resources, and the psychological deconstruction and reconstruction of a human being. The selection of Ilara Golan for the role of Anya Sharma was the result of a multi-stage screening process that prioritized psychological resilience and pre-existing skills over conventional field experience. Golan was an art historian and conservator working at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, specializing in early Islamic metalwork. Her academic credentials were genuine and impressive, but it was her personal history and psychological profile that made her the ideal candidate. Her parents, both diplomats, had been killed in a car bombing in Buenos Aires in 1994, an attack later linked to funding from the very networks al-Qasimi now controlled. This provided her with a deep, personal motivation that went beyond ideology or patriotism, a cold, patient desire for retribution that the Mossad psychologists believed would anchor her through the immense strain of deep cover work. Her handler, a veteran case officer named Ben, explained to her during the recruitment process that the mission would require the complete sublimation of her own identity for an indefinite period. She would undergo a process they called legend integration, where the fabricated persona of Anya Sharma would be built upon the foundations of her existing knowledge, but expanded and altered to create a new person. Her training was exhaustive and multifaceted. For 18 months, she was privately tutored by the world's foremost and unwitting experts in historical metallurgy, Arabic calligraphy, and celestial navigation. She learned to distinguish the engraving style of a 10th-century Cordoban artisan from that of a 12th-century Persian, not as an academic exercise, but as an innate part of her being. She spent 6 months in a soundproofed facility, living and breathing the life of Anya Sharma. Her every action, from the way she made her morning tea to the books she read, designed to reinforce the new identity. The psychological conditioning was the most intense part of the process, involving prolonged isolation and memory exercises designed to blur the lines of her past, pushing Ilara Golan into a dormant corner of her own mind. The construction of Anya Sharma's cover identity was a masterpiece of intelligence tradecraft, a years-long effort to build a person out of digital and physical ether. The first step was to establish her academic credentials. Mossad's Information Warfare Unit, Unit 8200, began by fabricating a digital history for her, backdating academic papers and conference attendances. They ghost wrote a doctoral thesis in her name on the metallurgical signatures of early Abbasid brass instruments and had it published by a respectable but obscure university press. They created a sparse but consistent social media and online presence, joining academic forums and listservs, where Anya would occasionally post insightful but brief comments, slowly building a reputation as a brilliant but reclusive scholar. They purchased a small apartment for her in Geneva, a city chosen for its neutrality and international character, and established a pattern of life there for 2 years before the operation's main phase. This included creating financial records, utility bills, and even medical histories. To solidify her legend as a hands-on conservator, they procured a number of genuine but less valuable antique instruments, which she would restore in her workshop, documenting the process on a private blog accessible only to a select few industry insiders. The most crucial element of her cover was the creation of a plausible reason for her reclusiveness and lack of a public history. Her legend stated that she was the sole survivor of a family tragedy in her youth and had inherited a substantial trust, allowing her to pursue her academic passions without the need for institutional affiliation or public engagement. This backstory not only explained her financial independence but also provided a psychological justification for her solitary nature, making her a character who was intriguing yet difficult to investigate. The technological component of Operation Celestial Sphere was as critical as the human element and required a similar level of bespoke creation. The objective was to physically access and compromise Al-Qasimi's primary laptop, a custom-built, heavily encrypted device that was never connected to any network, and was rumored to be protected by multiple layers of anti-tamper mechanisms. The technical specialists in Caesarea's technology division developed a solution they codenamed Stardust. It was not a single device, but a suite of tools, perfectly disguised as the high-end, specialized implements of an antique instrument restorer. The core of the system was a set of digital calipers, a tool Anya would naturally use for precise measurements. The calipers were indistinguishable from a commercial model made by a high-end German manufacturer, but their internal electronics were replaced with a sophisticated data acquisition unit. The device operated on a near-field magnetic induction principle. When brought within a few centimeters of Al-Qasimi's laptop, it could passively read the electromagnetic emanations from the CPU and solid-state drive, even through the laptop's casing and his briefcase. This process would be slow, requiring several minutes of sustained proximity. The calipers were programmed to target and exfiltrate specific data structures: the master file table, the encryption key store, and the partition containing his communication software. To activate the device, Anya had to perform a specific, non-obvious sequence of actions, opening and closing the caliper arms 3 times to a precise measurement, 11.38 centimeters, a prime number chosen for its randomness, and then pressing the 0 button for a duration of exactly 3.7 seconds. This complex activation sequence ensured it could not be triggered accidentally. The stolen data would be stored in a shielded memory module inside the calipers to be retrieved later. The entire system was a marvel of miniaturization and covert engineering, a weapon hidden in plain sight. With the legend of Anya Sharma firmly established and the Stardust device perfected, the operational phase began. The first step was insertion. Elara, now fully inhabiting her role, moved from Geneva to Lisbon. The city was chosen after extensive analysis of Al-Qasimi's known travel patterns and interests. Lisbon's rich maritime history and its connection to the age of exploration made it a logical destination for a collector of navigational instruments. She rented a workshop in the historic Alfama district, a space with large, north-facing windows that provided the consistent, indirect light ideal for conservation work. For 10 months, she lived a life of monastic routine. She established relationships with local suppliers of chemicals and tools, visited museums, and occasionally attended small, private auctions. Her goal was not to make friends but to become a recognized, if peripheral, part of the local antique scene. The Mossad support team, operating out of a separate safe house in the city, provided logistical support but maintained a strict no-contact policy. They managed her finances through untraceable offshore accounts, ensuring her legend's financial stability remained intact. During this period, she continued her online activities, publishing a short but groundbreaking article on a specialized forum about identifying the unique alloy compositions used by the famed 11th century Toledo instrument maker, al-Zarqali. This article, meticulously crafted by Mossad's research team and published by Anya, was the carefully prepared bait. It was designed to be irresistible to a connoisseur of al-Qasimi's depth, a piece of scholarship that would mark its author as a true peer. The build-up to the climax was a slow, tense game of strategic patience. 3 months after her article was posted, the first sign of contact came. An encrypted email arrived from a pseudonymous address, routed through multiple servers to obscure its origin. The sender, identifying himself only as a fellow admirer of al-Zarqali, praised her work and asked a series of highly technical questions about her research. This began a cautious, month-long correspondence. Elara, guided by her handler via encrypted single-use communication devices, responded with the perfect blend of academic passion and professional reserve. She never betrayed eagerness, answering his questions with precision but volunteering little. The correspondence was a delicate dance, a psychological chess match where her objective was to solidify her credibility without raising suspicion. The breakthrough came when the admirer mentioned he had recently acquired a previously unknown astrolabe that he believed was from al-Zarqali's workshop, but could not definitively authenticate it. This was the moment the entire operation had been building towards. The astrolabe was, in fact, a Mossad-forged masterpiece, a honeypot artifact created over 2 years by a team of metallurgists, historians, and artisans. It was designed with subtle but specific characteristics that only a true expert could question, a perfect problem for Anya Sharma to solve. After another 2 weeks of careful negotiation, a meeting was proposed. He suggested Lisbon. He would bring the artifact to her workshop for a private consultation. The trap was set. The final 24 hours before the meeting were a study in controlled tension. Elara followed her normal routine to the letter, a discipline drilled into her during training to manage the immense psychological pressure. She spent the morning cleaning her workshop, laying out her tools, and preparing chemical solutions for metal analysis, every action reinforcing her cover. A final, brief communication from her handler confirmed that the surveillance teams were in place, covering a 3-block radius around her building, but their role was purely for observation and, in the worst-case scenario, to document her failure. There was no extraction plan. She was entirely on her own. The stardust calipers lay on her workbench, nestled among other legitimate tools, their deadly purpose hidden beneath a veneer of scientific utility. She reviewed the activation sequence in her mind, a mantra she had practiced thousands of times until it was muscle memory. The psychological preparation was paramount. She had to be Anya Sharma, the curious academic, not Elara Golan, the avenging operative. Any flicker of fear, any hint of deception in her body language, would be detected by a man whose survival depended on his ability to perceive threats. As the afternoon light began to fade over the rooftops of Alfama, she sat at her workbench, the scent of solvents and old metal in the air, and waited. She was no longer just playing a role. She had become it. The antechamber of her mind where Elara resided was locked and silent. Only Anya remained. Zayd al-Qasimi arrived precisely at the appointed time, a testament to his discipline. He was unassuming in appearance, a man who could easily blend into any academic conference, yet his eyes held a quality of intense, analytical scrutiny. He was accompanied by a single bodyguard who remained outside the workshop door. The initial conversation, as reported later in Elara's debriefing, was focused entirely on the artifact. Al-Qasimi unwrapped the astrolabe with the reverence of a true believer, its brass surfaces glowing in the soft light of the workshop. It was an object of exquisite beauty, and for a moment, even Elara felt the pull of its history, a genuine appreciation that was part of Anya's core programming. For nearly an hour, they discussed its provenance, its markings, and the unique challenges of its construction. This was the most dangerous phase of the operation. Al-Qasimi was testing her, probing the depths of her knowledge with subtle, expert questions. Elara responded flawlessly, drawing on her years of intensive training, her conversation a seamless flow of technical jargon and historical context. She pointed out the faint traces of Persian influence in the calligraphy, a detail specifically planted by the forgery team to intrigue and challenge him. He placed his briefcase, which she knew from intelligence reports contained his laptop, on a small table next to her workbench, well within the Stardust device's operational range. The moment had come to transition from scholar to operative. The act itself was a sequence of fluid, deliberate motions, each one justified by the task at hand. Complaining about the fading light, Alara moved a lamp closer to the workbench, a move that also brought her body nearer to his briefcase. She explained that to properly assess the instrument's read, the intricate, star map-like plate, she needed to take a series of precise measurements of its thickness and curvature. She picked up the stardust calipers. Her heart rate remained steady, a result of both her training and the complete psychological immersion in her role. As she leaned over the astrolabe, she began the activation sequence. She measured a point on the artifact, clicked the calipers shut, and then opened them again, her movements slow and professional. 3 times she performed this action, the final measurement set to 11.38 centimeters. Her hand, holding the calipers, hovered for a moment near his briefcase as she gestured towards a particular feature on the astrolabe. With her thumb, she depressed the zeroing button, holding it for the prescribed 3.7 seconds. There was no sound, no light, no indication that anything had happened. Inside the device, the near-field induction coil activated, and a silent, invisible stream of data began to flow from Al-Qasimi's laptop into the caliper's hidden memory. The transfer would take approximately 4 minutes. She had to keep him engaged, her proximity to the briefcase justified, for that entire duration. She launched into a detailed explanation of the unique challenges of dating brass alloys, a complex topic she could speak on for hours, her voice calm and academic, while just inches away, the entire architecture of his financial empire was being stolen. The 4 minutes felt like an eternity, a pocket of suspended time where a single wrong move could unravel everything. Alara continued her analysis of the astrolabe, using other tools, a magnifying glass, a small brush, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She deliberately kept the stardust calipers in her hand, treating them as her primary measuring tool, moving them around the artifact in a natural pattern that kept them consistently within range of the target. She could feel Al-Qasimi's intense focus, not on her, but on the object of their shared passion. His guard was down, his paranoia temporarily superseded by his intellectual curiosity. She concluded her assessment, declaring the astrolabe a masterful, but likely 19th century, forgery, albeit one made by a craftsman with a profound understanding of the original techniques. She explained her reasoning, pointing to microscopic tool marks and a telltale chemical signature in the alloy, all details her own support team had painstakingly created. Al-Qasimi listened intently, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but also respect for her expertise. The transfer was complete. She placed the calipers back on the workbench, their work done. He thanked her for her time, carefully rewrapped the artifact, and left. The workshop door closed, and she was alone. For a full 10 minutes, she did not move, her body finally registering the immense strain. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a ship's horn from the river. The execution was over. The escape and extraction were as unconventional as the rest of the operation. There was no frantic flight, no clandestine border crossing. Alara's instructions were to remain in place, to continue living the life of Anya Sharma for another 3 weeks. This was a critical part of the plan, designed to prevent any suspicion from falling on the quiet academic in Lisbon. The day after the meeting, she delivered the stardust calipers to a pre-arranged dead drop, concealing them inside a hollowed-out book on Portuguese ceramics, which she left at a designated table in a quiet library. A separate Mossad team, composed of individuals who had never seen or met her, retrieved the package an hour later. From there, the device was transported via diplomatic pouch to Tel Aviv. Alara, meanwhile, continued her routine. She worked in her shop, she bought groceries, she responded to emails. It was a period of profound psychological dislocation. The mission was over, but she was still trapped inside her cover identity. The process of extracting herself was gradual. 3 weeks later, following a precise schedule, she packed a single bag, left a note for her landlord, and took a train to Madrid. From there, a different support team facilitated her journey through a series of commercial flights, her identity changing at each stop, until she finally landed at Ben Gurion Airport, no longer Anya Sharma, but not yet fully Alara Golan. She was a ghost returning to a life she barely remembered. The consequences of Operation Celestial Sphere were immediate and catastrophic for Al-Qasimi's network. The data retrieved by the Stardust device was a treasure trove, the Rosetta Stone of modern terror financing. It contained not only the complete ledger of his financial transactions, but, more importantly, the master encryption keys for his entire communications system. Within 48 hours of the data being decrypted by analysts at Unit 8200, a coordinated global operation was launched. Dozens of key financial nodes in Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia were neutralized simultaneously. Bank accounts were frozen, couriers were arrested, and shell corporations were dissolved. The network, which had taken 2 decades to build, was effectively decapitated in a single day. Al-Qasimi, stripped of his infrastructure and his anonymity, became a fugitive. He was tracked to a villa in Pakistan 6 months later, not through signals intelligence, but through the financial trail his own stolen ledgers had revealed. The operation to capture him was swift and final. Strategically, the intelligence gathered from his laptop provided insights that reshaped the West's understanding of non-state actor financing for years to come. But the victory came at a profound cost, borne almost entirely by one person. The psychological fallout for Alara Golan was deep and lasting. Returning to Israel, she found herself adrift, a stranger in her own life. The persona of Anya Sharma, so meticulously constructed and inhabited for so long, refused to recede completely. She found herself thinking in the quiet, analytical patterns of the scholar. Her emotional responses muted, her connections to her past life as Alara feeling thin and unreal. She underwent extensive psychological debriefing and therapy, a process her handlers referred to as identity reintegration. But some part of her had been permanently altered, overwritten by the mission. The cold, focused purpose that had driven her for years was gone, replaced by a disquieting emptiness. She had achieved her revenge, but the act had consumed the person who had sought it. The clinical detachment that had made her the perfect operative now served as a barrier to reconnecting with the world. The Mossad honored her as a hero, but it was a quiet, unseen heroism. She was given a new identity, a comfortable life, and a generous pension, but she was also a permanent ward of the state, her true story a secret she would carry to her grave. She had been the perfect weapon, forged and deployed with devastating success, but like any weapon used for its ultimate purpose, she could never be the same again. The moral and ethical questions raised by her transformation, the deliberate fracturing of a human psyche for strategic gain, were debated only in the most secure, soundproofed rooms in Tel Aviv, far from the woman who was their living embodiment. Was the state-sanctioned destruction of Alara Golan's original identity a justifiable means to an end, or does it represent an ethical boundary that should never be crossed, regardless of the threat? In exploiting a man's deepest intellectual passion to orchestrate his downfall, did the operation demonstrate a brilliant strategic mind or a cynical, nihilistic approach to intelligence warfare? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.